ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ. Welcome to the 28th episode of Sikhi Speaks. We often find ourselves in situations where we end up blaming or being blamed. We blame others, we blame ourselves, and if nothing else works, Vaiguji comes to our rescue and we put every blame on him. But why? What is the need to blame? Why do we need to blame? Is it somehow our mind working behind it? Is it some kind of game that our mind plays with us? To understand this concept from psychological and Gurbani perspective, we have with us today Dr. Gobinderjit Kaur. She's a clinical psychologist in the UK and has worked with the NHS for over 10 years now. She's mostly been working with severe and complex mental health issues and also works with health issues such as cancer and renal issues. She is the one who founded the Sikh mental health charity, that is Sikh Your Mind in the UK. She founded it 5 years ago, and her aim was to support Sikh community with their mental health and to bridge the gap between Gurbani and Western models of psychology. How beautiful that is. We are obliged to have Penji here, Dr. Gobinderjit Kaur.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh ji. How are you, Penji?
I'm okay, thank you, Penji. How are you?
All good, Penji. Thank you so much, Penji, being here. We welcome you to Sikhi Speaks.
Thank you.
Penji,
It's really great.
Right. So we've been talking about blame. In the world, in the era that we live in, blame is a major concept, is a major issue. So, but why is it important to understand about blame? What does blame play? How blame plays a role in our lives?
I think you're right, Benji, that blame is such a massive role in our life. I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to define what blame kiya. So the first thing is so blame is when we say or we think something, we think that someone or something has done something wrong or is responsible for something bad happening to us or to something that we care about. And it's important because our brains, our human brains, we want predictability, we want to know things. So when we blame, we try and confirm our worldview. So we think actually when we blame, we need to know who is wrong and who is right, and that who is wrong will be punished and who is right will be rewarded. So it's a lot about like knowing, very black and white thinking, because as human beings, it makes us feel comfortable if we know. But there's three options with blame. We have three options when it comes to blame. So the first is to blame ourselves. The second is to blame other people. And as you said, Benji, the third is to blame God. If all else fails, blame God. And what we know is that as soon as something happens, we do want to automatically, most of us, and I know I have done the same, is whose fault is it? Who's responsible for this?
Right.
And when we blame ourselves, we sometimes do that to feel more in control of what's happened to us. And that's a bit bizarre, but I work in adult mental health and I see lots of people who've been through traumatic experiences, and they come and they're often very self-blaming. And the reason for that is that if they can blame themselves, then they feel more in control of what happened than if they blame other people who they have no control over, because we don't have any control of anyone else but ourselves. So to self-blame is like a survival strategy. And then the second option is to blame other people. So when we blame other people, that's like a defense, like a wall goes up. And we blame other people because we don't actually want to look, or we can't look internally or accept our responsibility. And it also, when we blame other people, it helps to justify our emotions. And we know that with blame comes anger. So anytime we feel angry, we feel uncomfortable, we feel that we're in pain, we want to actually then look outwardly to blame someone else for that. We don't want to have to feel any of that for ourselves. And then the last option is blaming God. When all else fails, God is our scapegoat. And when we project blame into God, again, that stops us from recognizing any responsibility for what is happening right now. And then we, you know, and when we can't find fault anywhere else, that's our final option.
Especially, is it like we need something to put things on?
I
What
think it's the
goes
way.
on in our mind? What is the psychology? What is the concept behind it? Why do we need to blame?
I think that there's something about like making sense of the world. I don't think we need to blame, but I think when we try to, when blame is the first thing that comes to our mind, it's we're trying to make sense of whose fault is this, who is responsible
Mm-hmm.
for this, who should be punished for this sometimes, and I
Yeah.
think there's something about the culture, you know, and the society that we live in, you know, so our
Is it?
brains, we learn a lot from the people around us.
So, Pranchi, you talked about culture. So, what is culture? How culture plays a role in this? Is it like our upbringing, society? How?
I think it's all of those things. I think there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely sort of the people around us, like Sangat, our parents, our family, they have a massive impact. So if I see my mum constantly like externalizing responsibility and blaming others, I will learn to do the same thing. Even though I don't even understand what she's doing, I will learn that that's how I react in a situation. But in my clinical work with mental health issues, I've seen a lot of people come in, often from our community or even other Asian communities, blame black magic, blame jinns, you know, for their mental health issues, and obviously blame their parents and all the people around them. And whilst some of that, especially maybe parents, some of that might be kind of part of the story, it doesn't help us to move on with our lives. You know, so actually blaming really stops us from moving. I also had another thought more recently about colonialism. Like obviously in India, the British came, it's a British Empire.
Yeah.
Obviously I live in England, so the dominant culture here is still white British. And we then become like the dominant culture. We forget our own history. We forget our own opinions, our own attitudes, our own values, our Sikh history, our itihas. We forget all of that, and we become like the people around us. And for me in the UK, that is like, you know, I have to think about how do white people look at blame? How do they,
Mm-hmm.
whether they accept some, you know, they reflect on themselves, or whether they, you know, they blame other people. And often, and this is true even in the NHS, you know, blame is about power. It's about who is the most powerful person, because often the people who are most powerful then blame the marginalized groups. And we see that more recently with Black Lives Matter. It was about blaming, you know, it was black people and what they did wrong rather than thinking about their history, you know. So as we as Sikhs, we're a marginalized community, and we are often looked at in very negative ways sometimes, both in India and in the UK. And we have to remember that actually the people who are powerful, they a lot of the time they do the blaming, and they pick out the smaller groups. So I think our culture, our community has a really big role to play here.
Right. But you talked about like how blame affects us. While we are blaming, what is happening to us? How does it affect us?
Well, it's a really emotional place to be in when we're blaming. So when we are blamed, when we are blaming another, well, like I said before, we're not looking internally, we're not looking inside, we're not looking at what's actually going on. It's often quite automatic. And I have to tell you a funny story, even though my husband will hate this. But just earlier, I was thinking about blame, and then I was making something, and I got some naans out, and or tuttesi, like they're broken. And my husband said, "You did that." And automatically he blamed me for it. I didn't do it. It was just in the packet
Yeah,
like that. And it's an
right.
automatic reaction that we have to blame or look for someone to be responsible for something that's happened. And it happens like without even knowing it. And obviously मैं आज blame the gal karni si. So I said to my husband, you just blamed me. You just blamed me, and you did it so automatically. And he smiled. But ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਏਦਾਂ. So it's important to recognize ਜਦੋਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, because it's a very automatic place. But when it's about big things, it can be very emotional, it can be very powerful, and actually it doesn't help us. It helps us to feel more helpless, because if I blame other people all the time, where's my power? What can I do about it? if you're responsible for what's happened to me.
So when we are blaming others, we are actually making ourselves feel helpless. So what happens to us when we self-blame, when we blame things on ourselves? What is happening to us then? And what happens to us when we actually get blamed by others? So somewhere I feel that it is not only the person who is blaming others who's being affected, but it also has a very devastating effect on the person who is being blamed. Is it so?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the first bit about when we blame ourselves, again, that's we can't really move forward with any sort of blame, whether it's blaming others, blaming ourselves. We can't move, or blaming God. We can't move forward because actually we become stuck in the emotion of if I blame myself all the time, what can I do about it? If I keep talking about blame, I just don't think it's helpful, and it can actually make me feel less confident. My self-worth, worsens, and I just generally feel like I don't have any power really over everything. So it goes back to helplessness and powerlessness. When we think about the blamed person, the person who's always blamed, that again is a really difficult position to be in, because it has, I often hear of my clients who talk about, I'm the black sheep of the family. So they always get the blame. That becomes the story. And again, they can't, it has an asar on them. They can't then move forward with their lives because they always think, I'm at fault. I did something wrong. Because even if in the beginning you didn't believe it, as time goes on, you start to believe it. Oh, I am to blame. Yes, I did do that. Even though it might have nothing to do with you, but we become our stories. The stories that people tell us about ourselves, we become them.
Is blame contagious? So like if one person is blaming another person, everyone around them would start blaming them, or would start believing that, yeah, I guess that person is wrong.
I don't know the statistics, but I feel like it's really important to think about how blame is. It's like a cultural thing. So actually, if you see it happening a lot, and it's like if the blame is the culture of an organization, of a family, or of the sangat that you're around, then it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to do anything different. And obviously, if you've got Sikhi at your core, then we're talking about something different. But if we're thinking about generally mankind, and you just go, we're kind of creatures of habit, and we want to fit in. And when we want to do that, then we carry on with the majority.
Right. When we say that, when we're talking about Sikh, it's something different. So where does Gurbani talk about it? Since this is a major topic, does Gurbani talk about it?
Oh, does Gurbani talk about everything? Yes, it does. I was so grateful for this topic when we like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to say, but actually it was really, really important. It's really important to talk about blame because again, when I think about the clients who've come to Seek Your Mind or my NHS role, they talk a lot about karam as well, and I think karam and there's some element of blame seem to go hand in hand. Like if I talk about karam, then that's something about blame there. And what we know is Gurbani talks about everything. Maharaj has given us the answers, we just have yet to find them. I was looking at the different angs that were coming up, and I can pronounce the Gurbani, but maafi karo if I don't pronounce it right. But the first line that I found was dos det aagahe ko anda. So the spiritually blind place the blame on others. This is what we do. We do it all the time. And Maharaj then goes on to even talk about, whatever I've done, I think he goes, Je me kiya, so me paya, dos na dije avar jana. So whatever I did for that. Yeah. So I do not blame anyone else. And it's important that we, when we talk about karam as well, we often think of the bad karam. There's also good karam. Karam isn't, we've labeled it as bad, and I think it's important to think about actually everything's happening for a reason. everything that we go through in our lives, and how we interpret that, whether we blame other people, whether we blame Vaheguru, whether we blame, something else for that, is it going to help us to move forward? And Maharaj often talks about like feelings like hatred, conflict, vengeance. Why waste your life on those things? What is that going to give you?
Absolutely. So, Fuji, there comes another concept, which is collective blame. So we end up blaming the whole community, the whole group, even whole nation. So we have seen such consequences, consequences of such blame. Why does this happen? And why do we all start following that blame and do not even question it?
I think that's massive, isn't it? And when I was thinking about collective blame, the first thing that came to mind was coronavirus. The blame to the Chinese as one example. Like the Chinese people,
Absolutely.
yes, it might have started there, but all Chinese people are the cause of this. So it becomes everybody, doesn't it? And I think, again, it's a place, it's quite a difficult place to be in. A bit like Muslims and ISIS, it's the same thing. Every Muslim must be bad then because of what ISIS are doing and have done. And actually, when we do that, we're in a really big, a really difficult place of prejudice, racism, sexism, discrimination. All of those things are happening then. And often, again, it is the marginalized, it's the people that don't have a voice in the community that do get blamed for these things. And it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. It's about having an answer. We want answers. And as Gursikhs, I think it's important that actually Maharaj has the answers. We don't need to know everything. We don't need to. Sometimes engaging our mind intellectually is quite unhelpful. It can actually make us even more confused. The intellectual side of things, like understanding, seeking, searching, is helpful. But when we start to, where's our feelings in this? When we separate the two out, it's quite unhelpful. So I think sometimes that doesn't help. And when we think about kind of collective blame, we have to think about like why is that group being blamed for all of this? And it's often, again, society saying that country or that group of people are responsible. And we go along with it because we might get these messages from everywhere, social media, the news, our parents. And it's really unhelpful because we lose sense of humanity. We forget that these people are people. And I think, again, bringing it back to Sikhi, like that is our core. We are all one. We should treat everyone the same. And we have the ideology, but when we put it in practice, where does it go?
Absolutely. So, Paji, talking about the coronavirus situation, what is the difference between pointing something that is wrong and then blaming someone for what is happening? So how do we differentiate?
I think that's something we don't talk about enough. So, when I thinking about that question, you've got blame on one hand, and then the other side is accountability. So when you blame someone, that's about finding a fault. It's about punishing the wrongdoers. It's about the responsibility. Whereas accountability is identifying, well, this is what happened factually, and what do we need to change about that? What's not working so that next time it doesn't happen? So you still identify what went wrong, but it's less emotional because actually things change when we're accountable. When we're identifying the responsibility somewhere, things can change. We're actually open to learning. But when it's about blame, it's full of emotion. So I think it's really different actually, because with the coronavirus, if we blame those Chinese markets and the Chinese people, what changes? Not a lot. We get full of hatred. We think we're never going to go to China, never going to buy anything from China. Like, we think all of those things. When we think about accountability, we think, what is it about that place that was unsafe? Next time, what needs to happen? What processes and what structures do we need to put in place so this doesn't happen again? So we learn a lot more from accountability than we do from blame.
Mm-hmm. Ranji, somewhere this blame is not a new concept. It has been there since ages. How do you think that Sikh Itihas It gives us incidents to reflect upon and understand the concept even deeper.
I think there's so many. Like I'm not a Sikh historian. I wish I knew more Sikh history really, and I have to do my own code into that. But just when I was thinking about Itihas, the think about how many shaheeds, how many of our Sikhs, our gurus have passed away, have died, have given their shahidi for a different religion. So, like just an example, Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji. And thinking about Guru Arjan Dev Ji and his Shahidi and their Shahidi, and even Bhai Mani Singh's Shahidi. Like the way that they gave Shahidi was, for any normal human being, that would be horrific. That would be painful. We would come out of that thinking, like, if it was me and my parvar were there, they would be like, they would blame people. They would say it was your fault. But did our gurus do that? Did our gurus blame anyone? Those, having become a new mom, I'm thinking about the story of with the Bibian with their babies around their necks. Did they blame anyone? And no, because their faith in Sikhi, their faith in their guru was so strong that they were able to actually concentrate on what was needed right then, which is to focus on Naam, to focus on Gurbani, to focus on the Shabad. They had the faith was so immense. So blaming, like our gurus went through horrific things that we've had no experience of that. And they didn't blame anyone. What they did do was that they actually learned from that. So after Guru Arjan Dev Ji's time, Miriam Piri, Guru Har Gobind Ji came into power, and Miriam Piri was instated as part of our Sikhi, and the need to be both temporal and spiritual. And so we learn from that, but we can't learn if we're blaming people. And I think that's really crucial as Sikhs, because we can take so much from our history.
If they didn't blame, what did they do? How did they actually, reflect upon the truth? How did they actually rationalize things? Had that rational thinking? So, what can we do? How can we do things differently?
I think the first thing is even noticing. So as I said earlier, my husband did it automatically. He didn't even notice what he was doing. And we all do that. We will all blame something. Like if I break something, I'll probably, blame there's so many dishes there and it's someone else's fault. So we do it automatically. So the first step has to be to recognize what is happening. What is your automatic go-to? What do you automatically want to do in that moment? And if you start to become more self-aware, then that won't help you just in blame. That will help you generally, because you will start to learn your automatic reactions. You start to learn a bit more about yourself. And instead of blaming others, I think it's your fault that I did this. Actually, like, how do you feel in that moment? Actually, I felt quite sad when you told me the naans were broken. So it's important to just think about how you feel, because actually blaming other people is really unhelpful, not only for the other person but for you, like we've said. So that self-awareness is really key. And I do think sometimes, Benji, if I'm being really honest, in our community we don't really get an opportunity to learn that. We don't get to learn to be self-aware. We're very much workaholics. Sif kam hi karde hai, like all the time. My parents, different generations in Punjab, in England, in every other country, we just keep going. We don't stop. ਅਸੀਂ ਨਾ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ, ਅਸੀਂ like feeling about it. So it's really, really important to talk about these things. And this is why vichar is so important. Because when you've got sangat around you that you can actually talk to about things like blame, things about like different sakhis, itihas, that really then it clicks, doesn't it? And then it makes sense to you in your life now. And I think one psychological coping strategy, but I say psychological, it's not, because Gurbani and other religions have talked about it forever. It's about mindfulness. It's about being present. When we're actually present, we can change things. If we're blaming people, we're actually still in the past. You did this to me. And again, Benji, I have to say, our community, we do that a lot. You did this. Flana did this. 30 saal ho gaye han, and and then we can't move on. We find it very hard to move on from that. And when we do that, actually, it really doesn't help us. It doesn't help our families. It doesn't help our society. It doesn't help anyone. We just get stuck. So when we're mindful, we can actually be more present focused, because the only control that we have is what we do now. And even, obviously Maharaj talks about all of these things. But one book that I remember, I haven't got the Gurbani here, but it said, Farid says, answer evil with goodness and do not fill your mind with anger. So your body will not suffer from any disease and you will obtain everything. And that's how powerful these emotions are. Like, with blame comes anger, because when we blame people, we become angry at them for doing this to us. And when anger comes into our mind, well, it's hard. Mara talks about anger and how unhelpful that is, and how our aim in this life is actually to not feel angry, and not to suffer with that emotion. So it's really important to kind of focus on Gurbani and always bring Gurbani and what Maharaj is saying into our lives in this way. And I read, I was listening to a katha by Gyani Pinderbal G, and I really like his kathas. And there was just one bit that I remember really clearly. And it was about how he was saying, we don't blame scissors. We're making kapre, we're making like a suit or whatever. We don't blame the scissors for cutting the material, even though it's cutting.
Right.
And so we shouldn't blame anyone for bad things that happen. And he described something else, that there was he was just saying a story. I can't remember exactly all of it, but that there was someone riding a bike and he fell off, and someone pushed him off actually. And then he really wanted to find the man who pushed him, because he wanted to say thanks. He didn't want to blame him. He wanted to say thanks, because that's the power of Gurbani. That's the power of Naam, that you see love everywhere. No matter what happens to you, you see love everywhere. And I think I don't say this to put people down, because I'm not there yet. I wish I was. I wish I saw love everywhere. But it's a journey, and we have to look at our goals, and we have to think where we want to get to, because even though it might seem hard now, actually that's the goal, isn't it? To be full of prem. And really imagine what it would be like to be full of prem, to see everyone and everything with such love and pyar.
This actually brings me to an incident. So actually, it is an Itihasic incident. Itihas tells us that when Sikhs, they were to live in jungles, they were to leave their homes, live in jungles and fight, they could rarely get food to eat. So this is actually, someone explaining who Sikhs are, when they explain that when Sikhs do not have, when Sikhs are traveling in a jungle, they would, and they find a spot to stay and take rest, they would start preparing langar from whatever they get hold of. And when the langar is prepared, they would, beat drums, and they would call everyone around, every villager that is around, who is not even a part of their, their journey. They would call everyone and they would say, okay, come, langar is ready, so just have it. And they would eat it only if something is left after that. And then somebody questioned, what if, some dushman comes, an enemy comes, and he wants to have langar? They were like, Sikhs would even feed them. So this is, I guess, the love that we're talking about, love for everyone, love that Pai Kanhaiya taught us. That even if it is your enemy, you need to look at them as an individual, as a part of Maharaj.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. It's our Sikhi is so rich, and Maya, sometimes it takes over and we forget, even in a moment, just forgetting, and life and work, everything else feels more important. But the reality is, Sikhi is a jewel. We are so blessed to be part of to have Sikhi as part of our lives, and we're so, honestly, and I love like conversations like this, because I remember again, and it feels so much more powerful, and I can feel like something, Honestly, Maharaj has done so much benti, so much kirpa to be here in this conversation now, and to think about the way we can live our lives, because we've got our history, our ancestors. Look what they've achieved. Like, they have had horrendous things happen to them, and we would call them horrendous, but then look what they went on to do. You know, it's so powerful.
It is indeed. Especially that one thing that we need to do is be self-aware. How do we do that? What are the psychological strategies, and how does Gurbani teach us to be self-aware? So how can we actually bring that into our daily practice?
For me, the way I look at self-awareness is even noticing something as simple as, when I get angry, what happens to my body? Does my heart start beating faster? Do I get sweaty? Do I get hot? Do my legs start tingling? Do I get butterflies in my stomach? So all these physiological things are happening. But because we don't talk about things in this way, we don't notice them. So often, actually, if we do even notice them, we push them away because we don't want to pay attention. We want to carry on. We want to do what we need to do. Like, we need to do the housework. We need to make sabji dal, or, you know. But that's not important. Actually, that's not important, because actually, in that moment, recognizing how you feel is important, because how you feel will affect the kind of representation you give to the world. You know, and how connected you can become to Maharaj, to get to Nirvan, essentially. That's our plan, isn't it? So if we can be connected to ourselves, and Guru is in everyone, then we can connect with others, and then that prem can really come out. It isn't easy, though, if you've never done this before. And, you know, I think in terms of emotions, it's about recognizing, like, even going through a list of emotions, like happy, sad, fearful, you know, pain, joy. When you think about those kinds of emotions, how does it affect you? Because actually the way it affects you will be different to the way it affects your mom or your dad. It will affect everyone differently. But it's about recognizing it first. And sometimes in that, so we recognize the feelings, but also the thoughts. So ਜਦੋਂ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ like ਬੈਠ ਕੇ, you know, if you do simran, if you do you know, part even, so recognize where your thoughts go. So we try really hard to practice to keep our mind on Vaheguru. We try really hard. It doesn't always happen, though. And in order to get better at it is not to blame yourself. Oh, I'm so terrible, it's not happened, I'm never going to do this. It's not to do that, because that's not going to help. But it's to continue to try. Every time your mind goes somewhere, bring it back. Just keep saying, oh, it's gone. Come back now. Come back to this talk or this body in the what I'm reading, you know, in the part that I'm reading, or come back to Vaheguru, and keep saying that. So just keep coming back, because this is a practice. And the more you practice it, the better that you get at it. And it's not easy, but it is possible.
So if I try to, you know, summarize it, like, how do I understand it? That our mind is like a child, so you need to train it. It is not that you would start blaming the child if it is not doing something correct. You'd rather, you know, tell the child again and again to do that thing, and one day the child would successfully learn how to do that particular task. So we need to tell our mind again and again to be engaged in that particular behavior, because that is how, you know, behaviorally we can also train our mind. Is that so?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know, one thing though about children, Benji, is that children are really good at being mindful. Like when they're playing with something, their attention, or even with TV, their attention is on the TV, or they're playing, and nothing else.
Right.
And we had the skill, but we've lost it. And that's why Mara talks about, when we come out of the womb, we're actually the closest to Vaheguru then. We are the closest, because we can actually attend to Vaheguru. We've had that connection. When we get older, everything else has an impact. So we have had that skill. We just need to relearn it.
True. That is nostalgic. So As you just said, you're talking about that Pankti, Rida Bureda Palakar, the Sammanina Hindai. So it is, so is it like when we are angry, one reason for blaming or for searching for something to blame upon is our anger?
I think it's multiple things. So it's what we've learned, how we've learned to be. So it can be an automatic thing. We don't even know we're doing it sometimes. It can be often when we blame people, we do feel angry. But I wonder if anger comes second. It happens. I blame you, and then I get angry at you. And I get angry at something else because you've done something to me. You made me do this. So I think it's quite a complex process, but it's just identifying, like for some people actually they might feel angry as soon as something happens, they might feel angry and then need to blame someone. So it's about which emotion comes first, really. But either way, it's just so unhelpful when we blame others, when we think about the anger that comes out, because anger is just physically and mentally and psychologically, it does nothing for you. And the kind of life that we want to live is to manage that, to recognize, okay, things can make us angry, but to do something helpful with it rather than blaming people and externalizing the responsibility.
What is that helpful thing that we can do?
When you're angry, it can be helpful to recognize that you're angry. So that's why you need to recognize, when you're angry, what does it feel like? Because over time you don't even want to feel that, because everything should be the same. There should be no like strong reaction like anger to anything. But for someone who's on their journey at the beginning, like anger is so powerful, and it can tell you like it can tell you something about yourself. Like anger can tell you you dislike this or that, but it's also about how you react to it. So when you become angry, it's a bit like a volcano. The anger shoots up through your body and then it comes out, and you need to do something with it. And it's a very powerful emotion in that way. And most of the time when we're angry, it doesn't help, because we might shout, we might do lots of other really unhelpful things, like throw things or hurt ourselves even, and none of those things are helpful at all. So in the end, when especially on the path of Sikhi, we don't want any of that. But as you're on that journey there, actually, like, it's learning, how do we manage this anger so it's no longer like causing massive issues in our life or dictating what we do.
Okay. So with pinching, isn't that very difficult? So like, as you said, that anger is a very powerful emotion. What do we do to bring ourselves to that stage where we can actually think about what is happening to me when I'm angry? Because what we usually do is whenever we are angry, we just burst out. We cannot control it. Like this has happened to a lot of cases that I've seen. Whenever we ask them to just think about it, like, I can't. It's so difficult. I just have the thing to take it out onto somebody. What do we do so that we are at least on that stage that we start thinking about what is happening to us?
Anger is really complex. So in the work that I do, lots of people come in for anger, but it's like imagine an iceberg. It's just the tip. Anger is just the tip. Underneath that is huge. There's loads of things. And that's where we really want to get to, the underneath the water, what's really happening. So anger might be what we see in that moment, but we also want to think about the bigger picture. And I think one way is practice. So if we were going to work on the anger without maybe looking at the history, we need to think about you are in control more than you think. So when you shout at somebody because you're angry that they did something, you do have control over whether you shout or not. Because who else controls that if it's not you? But what we do need to do, and with practice, is to slow it all down. So it all happens really quickly. It goes from 1 to 100 really quickly. That's what our mind is telling us. But the reality is there's lots of other numbers, 1 to 100. There's other things that are happening. So we might be thinking something. We might be thinking, you turn the TV off, or you dropped something on my foot. and that made me really angry. We might be thinking you did that on purpose. So these thoughts, they are present, but we don't recognize them because they happen so quickly. They come in so quickly that we think we go straight to the feeling, which is anger, and then we need to do something with it. But if you even start to notice your bodily reactions to anger, already then you're stepping away from the situation. Because imagine that somebody in the street, they shout at you or they call you a name or something. Before you react, you just recognize the impact that has on your body. You think maybe that your heart starts beating faster, or you feel cold or hot. If you notice some of those things, already your reaction will be different. Does that make sense?
Noticing these reactions absolutely does. Noticing these reactions, noticing what is happening to us physiologically, that is something that happens to us when we are mindful. So does being Naam Simran helps us in being mindful? How does it help us?
Oh, absolutely. So mindfulness has come into like Western models of therapy, but actually like Sikhi and other religions they've had it for ages, because it's about being present, isn't it? It's about when we're doing Simran, or when we're really like linking in with our Guru, we're really like in the present, in the moment, and we're nothing else. It's not about anything else. It's not about a noise outside. It's not about reacting to someone who says something on the street to us, but we're focusing on our Vaheguru. That's our focus. So the impact of anything else will be less. And that's key, and that's our aim, really, isn't it? Is to be doing Simran all the time, lagatar Simran, so that if we're so in Simran, we're so embodied, every breath is about Vaheguru, every day. Can you imagine that? Nothing would have any control over us. Nothing would lead us to react in an unhelpful way, because our focus isn't on this world. And that sounds like a dream, and it is the dream. But imagine, like, and I think that's why we have to start doing Simran constantly, like, getting a mala, or, even if it means 5 or 10 minutes in the day, set time. But I do think it's the easiest when you're walking around the house or you're walking down the street. Vaheguru, like constantly, because that, with everything we talk about in psychology, it's all about practice this new skill, practice so it can change something. And it's the same with Simran. If you really want to get closer to Vaheguru, we have to then actually change some things in our lives. We have to implement new things that we've maybe never done before.
Beautiful. So if I try to summarize all of it, it all comes down to being mindful of what our reactions are, how is our body and mind reacting to a particular situation. So, and that would come from Simran, Naam Simran. Naam Simran would help us be present in the moment, and then be aware of what is happening to us, what is happening around us, and not be distracted by the worldly distractions or thoughts about future or even the past that we would, this happens at times, and we think about something that has happened in the past, and then we are still finding out someone to blame it upon, because we cannot really get out of it. We cannot really understand why that happened. And then we end up asking ourselves, why did you do that to me? So being aware with Naam Simran is the key to it. And we need to be aware of the fact that when we are actually being part of this blame game, as we like to call it, we are not only harming the other person, we are harming ourselves as well. Our thought process, our mindset, all of it are being affected. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And in our talk, it sounds easy. It sounds very maybe possible, but and that's the beauty of being a psychologist, that when we talk about it, it sounds easy, but the real test is the practice, is the application. And as you were talking, Benji, I was thinking something really basic that you probably know about, but I think for maybe the Sangats to practice is even something like a simple breathing technique of when you put your hand on your stomach, when you breathe in through your nose, your stomach should come out like a balloon. And then when you breathe out through your mouth, your stomach should come in. So it's really important to practice something like that, and even to introduce like Vahe Guru. So as you breathe in, Vahe. As you breathe out, Guru. So actually you're already slowing down everything. You're slowing it down, but also you're focusing on Vaheguru. And I think the next time that we notice, something uncomfortable is happening, whether that's, an uncomfortable situation, or we feel a certain way, whether we're angry or nervous or anything, is to practice something so simple like breathing in and out very deeply, but also focusing on Vaheguru, in and out. And the more we practice this, actually, the more focused we become to the present and Vaheguru. So it's, and it sounds easy, but the hard test is when we're really, really emotional. It's doing it then.
Sure. I was reading that study the other day. It talked about our vagus nerve. And that vagus nerve is a nerve which actually connects most of our body parts. And that is something that brings this experience of relaxation to us. And that study actually said that deep breathing is the key to activate the functions of vagus nerve. And it has been found that the people who practice deep breathing with a mantra are actually, that is the perfect way of doing it. Because when we are doing it with the mantra, what happens is that our breathing, it slows down even further. And the optimal number, they said, is breathing 6 times per minute. And when we actually observe, we are breathing actually endless times in a minute. So that slowing down would slow down our processes, our thought processes, leading to lesser anxiety and lesser thoughts to distract us. And when we look at Gurbani, Maharaj already told us why Guru Mantra hai. That's it. I mean, you have the key there.
Yeah, definitely. And it's important because I think when you do this in a safe environment, obviously you're more successful. You're going to be more successful. But I know with the people I've worked with, and even the people that have contacted us with Seek Your Mind, some people live in very unsafe places around unsafe people even now. And so what I think we both know that we're not saying this breathing technique is going to solve everything. It's not about that, but it's acknowledging that if you are safe, actually there are ways to manage your bodily reactions. But if there's lots of people around you and who are, you're still in a traumatic experience, you're still, in a very difficult position, a place that you live in, it's very difficult. And actually often in therapy, we don't start working with people until they live safely. They're safe away from difficult situations, away from their trauma. So that's really key, because I think there's lots of people out there who, unfortunately, they're still in a very, very difficult place.
Absolutely. So, Paji, looking at the time, we will now move on to the questions that actually Sangat has sent us. There are a couple of questions from them. One of this question is that we all face these kind of conditions when we are getting blamed, even though there's nothing that we have done about it. Like we have not done anything that things have gone wrong. So we have 2 options. Either we respond to it, to the blame, or we ignore them. And which option do we choose out of them? Also, what is the stage, what is the limit of that we should keep responding to it? Is that a good option?
I think that's a really good question. What I would say is there is more than 2 options. There's actually loads of options if you think about it. So you can respond or not respond, but you can actually you can walk away. You can take some time. So you can walk away short time and then come back to it. You can listen to a person. So when someone's, blaming you for something, you can listen, and that doesn't mean that you're agreeing. It means that you're actually hearing what they're saying, which is probably mostly what people need. People need to be listened to. It doesn't make it comfortable always for the person that's being blamed. Or you can retaliate. You can say something. You can talk about how you feel, or you can blame people. So you could start blaming. So there's so many different things that you can do, and I think it's a personal choice. But I think with what we've been talking about today is, if you keep getting blamed for something, and you if you want to respond, you have to think, is this going to be beneficial for me? If I keep responding every time this happens, is it helping me? And if it's not helping, then walk away. If it is helping, then think about that a bit more, because I think, as Gursikhs, as people, as Sikhs who are both spiritual and martial, we don't let people walk over us. That's not our mentality. We don't let people say what they want to us if it's not fair and it's not true. So it is important to stand up for yourself. But actually, if it's a pointless argument, because blame is often quite pointless, it does nothing. And so if it keeps doing that and it has an effect that's unhelpful for you, then you have to walk away, because it's not helpful. So I think there isn't a black and white answer to this, because I think if there's something that you keep getting blamed about and you need to put it straight, then you need to say what you need to say. You need to stick to, you need to share with someone how you feel, what it's always like to feel when you're blamed, and also try not to say it in a very emotional way, because actually when people are really emotional, we don't listen. And that's quite hard. So you might need some time to kind of think, so walk away first, and then to come back to the situation, to then explain it as, in a better way.
There's another question that I am being blamed for a lot of things, and this is making me go through an emotional trauma. What do I do?
Sorry, Benji, I heard the first bit of that.
So it said that I am being blamed for a lot of things, and this is making me go through an emotional trauma. What do I do?
I think it's really hard, because it does have such an impact on us, blame. And I think in those situations, it's about finding Sangat, it's about finding support for yourself, because there's always going to be someone in the community, whether that's in your family or wider community at work, wherever, there's always going to be someone who maybe doesn't like you, who does blame you. There's always something like that out there. And that's the normality of life, unfortunately. But if it's causing you to have a traumatic response and it's really unhelpful, then we need to think about what makes you feel safe. You need to have kind of things that are around that are supportive, that are helpful. Because actually anybody who's in a traumatic experience, who's always being blamed, for example, there's no way to thrive in that. To get closer to our guru even is much harder. It's not impossible, but it's much harder in those kind of situations. So thinking about who you can talk to for support, thinking about how you can get out of these situations is really important, because our sangat should be people that that offer us vichar, some good conversations, help us to grow, personally and in other ways. That's the whole point of the people around us, of Sangat, and Maharaj talks about. So it's really key that you are in a place like that. And obviously, if you're going through kind of traumatic kind of responses to the things that are happening, it's to find professional support if you can. And I know in Punjab and India, sometimes that's really helpful. That's not often widely available. But I think with everything that's happened with the pandemic, there's more online than there ever has been before. So actually, if you need support, then even Seek Your Mind, contact us at Seek Your Mind, and we can see how we can try and support you. And it's important to know that you're not alone. Obviously, we know that in Gurwani we are not alone. Maharaj is always with us, but we forget that. And sometimes when we forget that, know that there are teams of people, there are Sikhs out there who will help you as best they can.
So related to this only, we've got another question. It says that if we are away from Sangat, how do we take care of our own emotions? So is there any way of self-regulation that we regulate our own emotions?
I think again, it's like connection with our guru, like doing, like if you do, nitnem or part, or that, some people read specific part sometimes when they're feeling kind of low, to remind themselves of the connection. So we might not have the Sangat's connection, we might be kind of isolated, but it's to do things that keep us connected. So whether that's reading part, whether that's, on YouTube, or there's so many different great programs out there where you can actually join live sangat, doing kirtan in America or in India. You've got all of these amazing things at our fingertips. And so I think there's definitely ways that you can stay connected. I do think the key one, though, is to continue your connection with Vaheguru, and whether that's Simran, whether that's reading about Itihas, whether that's, doing Part, or all of those things. It's important that those things are still instilled in you wherever you are, whether you're the only Sikh in the world, in a certain country, or in your place of work, or whether you're around lots of people. It's important that that's always going on.
Beautiful. Last question that we've got is, what impact do you think this blaming thing has on one's personal Sikhi Jeevan, and how does this impact one's personal journey towards Akal Purukh? So, like, if we are blaming, how does that affect our personal spiritual journey?
If it continues to kind of take over our life, blaming, well, we know what impact that has. We become quite angry. We become, our self-esteem, our confidence has an impact. So if we think about the kind of person we become when we keep blaming, do you think that person is the ideal image of a Gursikh? And often the answer is probably no, because actually when we blame it, it's very it does make us angry. And Maharaj talks about kind of when our minds are filled with anger, we lose our mind, actually. We can't function properly. So it's really important to think about, the asar of blame. What impact does it have on us? And is that the kind of Gursikh that I want to be? And is that what Maharaj wants for me? So I think in terms of our Jeevani, I think it's quite clear that when something happens in our life, actually the way that we look at it is really important. So when we look at it from a blame perspective, we can get really angry. We can be filled with hatred and fear and conflict and revenge, and actually if we look at it in terms of the Gursikh perspective, that whatever Maharaj does is sweet to my mind. Whatever Maharaj brings to me is pleasurable. I mean, that's our ideal position. And blame has got nothing on that.
That is so beautiful, Panth. Before we say Fateh, just one message for the youth from your side.
I think it would probably be about like Sangat, and Benji, you said actually the key is Sat Sangat, the true Sangat around us, the true congregation of the holy. That's key. So wherever you are, whether you're in your family or work or somewhere else with friends, look around you and think about how your Sat Sangat is promoting the kind of Sikh that you want to be. So, whether blame comes up, or talking about other people like juglian, or, talking about TV even, or something that actually you think, actually, this is not what I want to do with my life. This is not what the focus I want it to be. Just look around you and think, is this promoting my Sikhi? Is this promoting my spiritual growth? Is this going to help me reach Sachkhand? Because that is always our aim, and I, for one, I forget that sometimes. I forget that when I'm at work, and I think this is the most important thing ever, working, and it's not. That's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to not live this life again, and to recite Naam, and to do Bart, and really feel it and emotionally connect with it. And the people around us really have a lot to do with that. So find your Satsangat.
Thank you so much, Panth, for such an educating session. It was so insightful to know how we are trapped in this blame game, how we automatically respond to it, and how Gurbani and our Itihas, they teach us, they show us the way forward.
Yeah, no,
Thank
thank
you
you,
so much,
Benji.
Benji.
This has been a
Thank
pleasure. Really, thank you for all your great work as well that you're all doing. Really great.
you. Maharaj Kripa ji. Thank you so much, Benji. ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ
ਕੀ
ਜੀ ਕੀ
ਫਤਿਹ
ਫਤਿਹ
ਸੰਗਤ ਜੀ March tells us ਬਾਦਿਓ ਆਪਨ ਹੋ ਬੰਦਾ ਦੋਸ ਦੇਤ ਆਗੇ ਕੋਂਦਾ we are trapped, we are bound in our own egotism, in our own vikar, our selfishness, our conceit, and being blinded by our vikar, we end up putting blame on others. We are so blind. Sangatji, it is a humble benti to all to be well aware, to bring that self-awareness of when we are falling prey to this trap of blaming, whether we are blaming, whether we are being blamed, whether we are self-blamed, whether we are putting a blame on Guru Maharaj. This is all a trap. We don't really need to blame. We need to bring awareness in the present moment. We have to be mindful of how our mind and the body are reacting to things. When we are aware of things, we do not end up ruining our spiritual journeys, our personal journeys. With blaming, we are actually pushing ourselves into a well of powerlessness, helplessness, low confidence, and ultimately tendikala, not chardikala. We often think that ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਤੇ blame ਪਾ ਦਿਆਂ ਤੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਅੰਦਰੋਂ ਬੁਰਾ ਨਾ ਲੱਗੇਗਾ. ਸ਼ਾਇਦ I can get over that thing that something bad has happened. But that is a misconception. We are misleading there. It is not only the other person that we are putting blame on that is being affected, who's being affected. We ourselves are becoming emotionless. We ourselves are becoming non-forgiving people. Sangatji, it is a binti to please be aware of our thoughts, our reactions. How are they helping us? How are they actually defeating us? Sat Sangat, the true Sangat, is who would help us break free from this trap of blaming and help us realize our true mind, which is Jyot Swarup. On behalf of whole team of Sikhi Speaks, I thank you all for your endless support and love. It is you who keep us going. Like, share, follow, and subscribe to Maoleyo for maximum laha. We'll be back with another great personality of Panth, guiding us on our journey to be ik with the Kalpurakh ji. Vaheguru ji ka khalsa, Vaheguru ji ki fateh.